"He's not sick, Corporal. He's done waiting." The words came from Warrant Officer Deschamps, and they landed in the briefing room like a spent shell casing, rolling across the floor with no particular urgency, but impossible to ignore. She was looking at the observation window, not at the three men standing behind her. Through the reinforced glass, the ward stretched in a long pale corridor of fluorescent light and institutional beige. 6 beds, 6 men, and a silence that had weight to it. They weren't unconscious. That was the thing nobody in the chain of command seemed willing to say plainly. The 6 veterans in Ward C of CFB Petawawa's residential psychiatric unit were awake, aware, and had collectively, methodically stopped participating in the world. No restraints, no sedation beyond standard protocol. They simply refused. Refused meals, refused sessions, refused to speak to the rotating cast of psychologists, psychiatrists, and peer support specialists who came and went through their ward with clipboards and careful voices. The youngest of them was 62. The oldest had turned 78 in February and had marked the occasion by turning his birthday cake upside down on the tray and saying nothing. Deschamps had inherited the file 3 weeks ago when the previous unit coordinator had taken emergency medical leave. She had read every page. The men came from different decades, different theaters. 2 had served in Cyprus in the 70s. 1 had been in the Gulf. The other 3 had seen Bosnia, Afghanistan, and a classified posting that appeared in the file only as a redacted line and a single letter, R, beside the approving officer's initials. None of them knew each other before this ward. None of them had bonded over shared history. What they shared was simpler and harder to treat. They had stopped believing anyone in this building had ever held a rifle, felt the particular cold of a desert night, or carried something that couldn't be set down. So they had gone quiet, collectively, completely, and with the kind of discipline that only former soldiers understand, not as protest, not as breakdown, but as a decision. The new commanding medical officer, Major Arsenault, was 37 years old, freshly posted from a joint health support unit in Kingston, and he carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had run excellent numbers at his last posting. He believed in structured therapeutic frameworks. He believed in measurable outcomes. He had redesigned the ward's morning schedule within his first week and printed the new version on a laminated card that he distributed to staff with genuine enthusiasm. He was not a bad man. Deschamps had worked under worse. But watching him through that observation window, watching him stand at the foot of a bed, speaking to a man named Sergeant Pierce, who had done 3 tours and was now staring at the ceiling with the serene blankness of someone who had simply gone elsewhere, she could see the gap. It wasn't cruelty, it was distance. The kind that gets built when you've never had to learn the particular grammar of men who have been used for something and then set aside. The recommendation from Ottawa is a specialist consult, Arsenault said, not turning from the window. There's a trauma integration team in Ottawa, very well reviewed, they've worked with. They won't talk to them either, Deschamps said. We don't know that. Pierce spoke once. 6 weeks ago, before I got here. One of the nurses wrote it down. She turned from the window and found the page in the file she was holding. He said, "Tell the next one not to bother unless he's been somewhere he can't talk about." Then he went back to looking at the ceiling. He hasn't said a word since. Arsenault was quiet. "These aren't men who are broken, sir," Deschamps said. It was not an accusation, but she didn't soften it either. They're men who know exactly what they're doing and have decided the people in this building don't speak their language. The major looked at her. "Then what do you suggest, warrant officer?" She didn't have an answer. Not that morning. It was the plumber who changed things. That was how it would be told later. Half in disbelief, half in the tone people use when they've witnessed something they can't quite categorize and have given up trying. Deschamps herself told it that way. She'd say, "It was the plumber," and let the pause do its work. His name was Elias Vance. He was contracted through a local maintenance company out of Renfrew, brought on-site to deal with a persistent leak in the supply room adjacent to Ward C. He was somewhere north of 70, though the paperwork said 68, and nobody was going to argue with the paperwork. He wore canvas work pants the color of old moss, a flannel shirt under a vest with too many pockets, and boots that had been resoled at least twice. He carried a canvas tool bag, the kind you don't see anymore, with a drawstring top that had been knotted and unknotted so many times the cord had gone soft and pale. He arrived at 7:40 in the morning, signed in at the desk, with the handwriting of a man who had learned penmanship in an era when it mattered, and was escorted down the corridor by a young private who was clearly hoping this would be quick. It wasn't quick. The supply room shared a wall with Ward C, and the access panel for the plumbing ran along that wall. Vance had to work with the ward door propped open to get adequate light on the pipe junction, and that meant the sounds of the ward, or rather the particular silence of the ward, drifted in around him as he worked. Deschamps was at the nursing station when she became aware that the ward had changed. It wasn't louder, it was the opposite. The ambient noise, the small mechanical sounds, the HVAC, the faint shuffle of the morning routine, had compressed into something different. She looked up. All 6 men were awake. That wasn't unusual. Most of them slept badly, but they were facing the same direction, not toward the window, not toward the door, toward the supply room. Through the open door, the sound of tools, methodical, unhurried, the particular music of a man who knows what he's doing and isn't performing it for anyone. Pierce, who had not sat up voluntarily in 11 days, was sitting up. Deschamps walked to the doorway. She didn't enter Ward C. She just stood there watching. Elias Vance was on one knee beside an open panel, his back half turned to the ward, doing something with a wrench that required his full attention. He hadn't acknowledged the men. He hadn't looked up. He was working the way old tradesmen work, with a kind of total absorption that has no performance in it, no awareness of audience, just the task and the hands and the years of practice behind them. One of the men, Corporal Whitford, who had served in Bosnia and had not spoken since a family visit 3 weeks ago that had gone badly, said quietly, to no one in particular, "He's got a rigid." Vance didn't stop working, he said without turning around. 40 years old. Don't make them the same. Whitford was quiet for a moment, then, "Where'd you get it?" "Hardware store in Pembroke, before it was a cell phone shop." Nobody said anything, but nobody looked away either. Deschamps did not move. She was aware of her own breathing, aware of the nursing station behind her, aware that if she walked in and said something, she would break whatever was happening. So she stood there, and she watched Elias Vance fix a leaky pipe, and she watched 6 men, who had not had a real conversation in weeks, find the edge of one. It was Sergeant Pierce who spoke next, and what he said was not remarkable in itself, but the fact that he said it, that he directed it at a specific human being in the room rather than releasing it into the indifferent air. That was the thing. Wrist or thread? Vance paused, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, and said thread. But the seat's worn. Thread was always just buying time. Pierce made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was in the neighborhood. Always is. Vance finally sat back on his heels and looked at the work. He did not look at the men yet. He looked at the pipe. "You know your fittings," he said. It wasn't a compliment delivered to fill space. It was an observation, neutral and accurate, from one person who knew things to another. "Grew up on a farm," Pierce said, "outside of Trenton. You fix everything yourself, or it doesn't get fixed." Vance nodded once. He reached into the canvas bag and found a washer. That was when the man in the bed by the window, a man named Hubert Cote, whose file contained 2 redacted postings and a commendation that couldn't be named, said, "You were in." It wasn't a question. Vance didn't answer immediately. He fitted the washer, checked it, fitted it again. "Different time," he said finally. "Which branch?" "The kind that doesn't have a branch," Vance said, and his voice was so even, so without drama or invitation, that it landed differently than it would have if a younger man had said it. It landed like a door opened from the inside. There was a long pause. Then Cote said, "Sit down." And Elias Vance, without any visible hesitation, without checking with anyone, without asking permission, closed his tool bag, stood slowly, and carried a chair from the corner of the supply room to the doorway between the rooms. He sat down in it the way men his age sit in chairs, carefully, with the awareness of what knees cost. And he looked at the 6 men in the ward the way someone looks at people they recognize. "You've got a bad one in the corner," he said to Deschamps without looking at her. She blinked. "Sir?" "The pipe in the corner. Under the 3rd bed from the left. The joint's weeping. You'll have it in the floor by spring." Deschamps looked at the ward, at the 3rd bed from the left, at the man in it, a retired master corporal named Archambault, who had served in a Kansofcom unit and had, according to his file, a habit of assessing structural vulnerabilities in every room he entered. Archambault was staring at Vance with the focused attention of a man who has just heard his own frequency played back to him. "I noticed it," Archambault said. Vance looked at him directly for the first time. "I know you did." Major Arsenal found out about it at 9:15 when a nurse came to tell him that Ward C was having a conversation. He came to the observation window and stood there for several minutes watching. Elias Vance was still in his chair in the doorway. He wasn't doing therapy. He wasn't following a framework. He was doing what men of a certain background do when they find themselves with others of the same background. He was talking about concrete things: weather, tools, a flooding problem at a property outside Arnprior, the particular impossibility of finding anyone under 50 who understood how to properly sweat a copper fitting. And the men were talking back. Not all of them, not about anything significant. But the ward had air in it again, the quality of air that moves through a space where people are actually present rather than simply occupying it. "Who is he?" Arsenal asked. Deschamps had her arms crossed. "Contracted maintenance. Here for a pipe. He's not certified for." "No," she said. "He's not certified for anything. He just knows how to sit in a room." Arsenal was quiet, watching. Pierce was saying something. Vance was listening, his head slightly tilted, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't have a clipboard. He didn't have a therapeutic goal. He just had the quality of attention that certain people develop over decades of situations where inattention had consequences. "This isn't protocol," Arsenal said. "No, sir," Deschamps agreed. "He's a civilian contractor. He shouldn't be." "Sir," she said it gently but without apology. "The last specialist we brought in had 6 sessions with these men and left with a migraine and a letter of professional concern. This man has been in the building for 90 minutes, and Pierce said 3 complete sentences." She paused. "I'm asking you to let it run." Arsenault looked at his laminated schedule card. Then he looked at the ward. Then, after a long moment that Deschamps would remember and respect him for, he put the card in his pocket and said, "My office is 12 steps from that observation window. You come get me if anything changes." He walked away. Deschamps stayed. Vance worked in Ward C for 3 hours. He found the secondary pipe issue he had mentioned, addressed it, and found 2 more minor concerns that he documented in his maintenance log with the thoroughness of a man who does not believe in leaving things half-finished. But he moved through the ward with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with plumbing. He checked fittings. He asked, occasionally, whether the temperature in the room was adequate, whether the window seals were holding, small questions about the material conditions of the space that were also obliquely invitations. He learned their names, not by asking but by listening to how they referred to each other. He told them nothing about himself directly. But things emerged, the way things emerge when people of a certain kind spend time together. A reference to the particular smell of a certain border crossing in the 80s. A comment about altitude and how it changes the way sound behaves. A single sentence about a dog he'd had for 11 years and what had happened when the dog died that came out quietly and was not elaborated on, but which Cote received with a nod that contained a whole conversation. At 11:45 he repacked his canvas bag, filed his maintenance report at the desk, and thanked the young private who had forgotten he was supposed to escort him out. He was at the door when Deschamps caught up with him. "Mr. Vance," she said. He turned. "How did you know?" He considered the question with the same evenness he'd applied to the pipe fitting. "Know what?" "That they would talk to you." He looked at the door to Ward C, then back at her. "I didn't," he said. "But I knew they weren't going to talk to anyone who came in with a goal." He shifted the bag in his hand. "Men like that can smell it. Purpose walking through a door. They've been purposed for most of their lives. When they're done, the last thing they want is another objective." Deschamps absorbed this. "So you just fixed the pipe?" "I fixed the pipe," he said. "The rest was their decision." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your file says 68. He gave her a look that was not quite a smile but contained one. "Files say a lot of things," he said. She tried anyway. "What branch?" He picked up his bag. "You have good people in there," he said, meaning the men on the ward. "They're not broken. They just got handed to people who haven't been where they've been. That's a lonely place." He pushed open the exterior door. The November air came in sharp and cold off the Ottawa River. "The one by the window, Cote. He sleeps on his right side because of the shoulder. It's been that way since Cyprus, I'd guess. You'll want to talk to him about that." He walked out into the gray morning, his boots unhurried on the pavement. Deschamps stood in the open door and watched him go until he reached the maintenance truck and loaded his canvas bag in the back. He didn't look back. He drove away with the particular patience of someone who has learned not to accelerate at yellow lights. She went back inside. She went directly to Ward C. She stood in the doorway. The ward was not transformed. These were not men who transformed easily, or quickly, or for an audience. But there was something different in the quality of the room. Archambault was lying on his side facing the window, which he hadn't done in days. Whitford had his feet on the floor and was looking at his hands in the slow, considered way of someone who has just remembered something about themselves. Pierce had his eyes closed, but the line of his jaw had changed. The locked-down quality was gone, replaced by something more like rest. Cote was looking at the ceiling. After a moment, without being asked, without looking away from the ceiling, he said, "He was JTF2, early days. Maybe before that, something else. I don't know the specifics. Doesn't matter." Deschamps said, "How do you know?" Cote closed his eyes. "The way he listened," he said. He wasn't waiting for his turn to talk. He was actually listening. A pause. You don't learn that in a classroom. 3 days later, a package arrived at the nursing station, addressed to Ward C with no return address, postmarked from a rural route outside Cobden, Ontario. Deschamps opened it. Inside there was no letter. There were 6 items, a small topographic map of Renfrew County, folded with the precision of someone who had been doing it for 50 years. A handwritten list of hardware stores in the region that still stocked older parts. A battered paperback on Northern Ontario water systems. A coffee table book on Canadian working dogs, heavily annotated in a small, even hand. A single black and white photograph, clearly from the early 80s, of a man in unmarked field dress standing at a tree line somewhere with snow on the ground, a German shepherd beside him in a working harness. The man was looking at the dog. The dog was looking at whatever was beyond the frame. On the back, in the same small hand as the annotations, "The post still matters, even when nobody tells you what it is." The 6th item was a tin of good coffee. The label from a roaster in Perth, Ontario. Nothing written on it, just the coffee. Deschamps set the photograph on the nursing station counter and looked at it for a long time. Then she carried it into the ward and set it on the small table near the window where the men could see it. Nobody commented on it directly. But that evening, for the first time in weeks, Pierce asked if someone could open the window. Not all the way, just a crack. One of the younger nurses did it, a little uncertainly, because it was November. The cold air came in and the men breathed it, and for a while nobody said anything, which was different from the silence that had been there before. The earlier silence had been refusal. This one was something else. This one was company. Major Arsenault came to Deschamps's office 2 weeks later. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway in a way that told her he had thought about this and was choosing his words. "Participation rates in morning group are up 40%, he said. "Yes, sir." Pierce asked about a vocational consultation. "He wants to know if there's a workshop program. I put the referral in yesterday." Arsenault nodded. He looked at the wall. "Whatever Vance did, the maintenance company says he's not available for the foreseeable future. And I can't exactly write 'hire the plumber for therapeutic purposes' in a funding request." "No, sir, but something changed." "Something changed," she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "I looked him up," Arsenault said. "Elias Vance, the name and the date of birth on the contractor form." He paused. "Nothing comes up, not in any system I can access." Deschamps said nothing. "I mean nothing," Arsenault said. "Not a plumber's license in Ontario, not a property record, not a vehicle registration. The maintenance company says he's been contracting for them for 4 years, cash work, no formal file." He paused. "You'd think a man would leave more of a footprint." Deschamps picked up the maintenance log from the corner of her desk. Vance's handwriting, precise and unhurried, the observations thorough, the recommendations specific. The handwriting of someone who had been writing careful, accurate reports for a very long time. "He fixed the pipes," she said. "That part is real. The pipe in the corner was failing. He caught it." Arsenault looked at her. "That's not what I meant." "I know," she said. "But sometimes it matters that the thing you can see is real, even if everything else is what it is." The major nodded slowly. He picked up his cap from the edge of the desk. "Cote told his primary therapist something yesterday," he said. "First unprompted disclosure since admission." He paused. "He said, an old man came through here last week. He was listening the way I was trained to listen. I think I forgot I could do that. I think I forgot that was worth something." He put his cap on, straightened it. "I don't know how to write that in a report," he said. "But I thought you should know." He left. Deschamps sat with that for a while. Then she picked up the maintenance log and added a note at the bottom of the last page, in her own handwriting, under Vance's final entry. Building is sound. Checked all critical junctions. No further concerns at this time. EV, she wrote, recommend rehire if available. In the spring, when the ice went out of the Ottawa River and the ward had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way things change when the underlying condition is addressed rather than managed. Deschamps ran into Whitford in the hallway outside the OT room. He was heading to the workshop program. He had a small piece of walnut in his hand that he was sanding with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been told the finish was in the preparation. "How's the shoulder?" she asked. "Getting there," he said. She nodded then. "Whitford, that day Vance was here. The first thing you said to him, about the wrench. Why did you say that?" He looked at the piece of walnut in his hands, turned it over. "Because he wasn't pretending not to be competent," he said. "Everybody in here, they're very careful not to be more competent than you. Very careful to let you feel like you're in charge." He ran his thumb along the grain. He just came in and he knew what he was doing. He wasn't performing it. He just knew. He looked up. "I haven't been around that in a while." She thought about that walking back to the nursing station. About competence as a language, about what it costs to be around people who speak it, and what it costs not to be. She thought about an old man in work pants walking down a gray November corridor with a canvas bag in his hand, not performing anything, not managing anything, just doing what he knew how to do, and letting the rest follow from that. She thought, that is the hardest skill there is, and the least teachable. The photograph was still on the table in Ward C. The man and the dog at the tree line, both looking outward, both oriented toward whatever was beyond the frame. The post still matters, even when nobody tells you what it is.